Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight, Joel Skousen. He's the editor and publisher of the World Affairs Brief. He's the author about preparedness, about strategic relocation, and the author of the book High Security Shelters. Joel, thank you for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm impressed with the quantity of interviews and substantive interviews that you put out, Dunnigan.
Oh, that's very flattering, and we're grateful for that. It's just a blessing to us, the caliber of guests that have been willing to consent to come on the show. And when founding this channel, I knew right off the bat that I had, a good intention and a good heart for wanting to help people, but I couldn't be that expert. I couldn't be the source of information, and I've been really humbled at the generosity of many who we've reached out to, and some have reached out to us. So thank you for being here. And in the past, you've focused with us on EMPs and the risks surrounding that, also how to harden your home for defensive architecture. You've talked to us about strategic site selection. And tonight, I wonder if we could turn our attention a bit more to global geopolitical and other affairs that are just swirling around us that people want to know with the start of this new year, 2019. And by the way, this is Thursday, January 24th, 2019. If you could start off by talking to us about some of the major theater developments that are happening, such as the arrangement that Trump evidently has been able to accomplish, or wants us to think has been accomplished in North Korea with Kim Jong-un. Do you think that there's real substance there, or what do you think is the reality of what's happening regarding North Korea and its risk posture to the rest of the world?
Well, as we talked about in, I think, one of our earlier interviews, and I'll just review this overall geopolitical threat that I see as the main one, and that is that in the middle of the next decade, Russia and China will be ready to strike the West. They've been building massive new weapon systems. They're in serial production now. It'll take them about 4 years to get fully prepared for war. So I think the window of opportunity for World War III comes about the middle of the next decade. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen then. They could delay for whatever reasons, or if provoked by our own globalists, it could come sooner. But I've always hypothesized that North Korea is the trigger event, the perfect trigger event for World War III, because you have the appearance of an unstable leader who can start a nuclear war, start a conventional war with South Korea, for example. The U.S. would have to intervene. They'd have to use tactical nuclear weapons at least to stop the overwhelming manpower advantage and arms advantage that North Korea has. And so I was very, very pleased that Donald Trump last year said, I'm going to solve this problem one way or the other. I'm going to try diplomacy, but if not, we're going to go to the military option. And that threat of the military option of 3 aircraft carrier groups off of the South Korean waters brought Kim to the table, and promising denuclearization. But it's interesting that he met with President Xi of China beforehand, and Xi kind of slipped him the notion that, look, Donald Trump can be flattered. He can be brought around by flattery. I did it at Mar-a-Lago, and he became a puppy dog. He stopped pushing me on China trade and all those things. Try that with Donald Trump. And so Kim lavished him with praise, promised him the world, and Donald Trump came away saying, wow, I believe this guy. This is a wonderful guy. And yet it became very obvious within the next few weeks that Kim was not intending to denuclearize at all. He refused to give a list of any of his nuclear weapons or where his missile sites were. He refused to even do a token disarmament of a single warhead. He refused to give them up. And Mike Pompeo, first as CIA director and then as Secretary of State went there 3 times and each time failed to get any kind of dismantlement at all. The only thing that Kim did offer up is the destruction of a missile test site, which had been previously already destroyed by earthquake. And so he was giving up nothing, essentially. But Donald Trump said he had a love affair with Kim Jong-un. He believes him, he trusts him, and he gave, apparently, just this past week, a lavish letter to Kim Jong-un saying that we'll work with you, we'll give you trade and aid and things, and we'll let you disarm at your own pace, apparently. And Kim Jong-un said today, it's a wonderful letter, we just praised Trump to the moon. I mean, obviously didn't push him about denuclearization, and that's why it's a wonderful. So I'm really worried that the North Korea threat will not be disarmed before its time. It will play out in its role, and North Korea, unfortunately, is going to be much more powerful. They're building as we speak, and they're not intending to disarm ever, I'm convinced. And so Trump is going to fall into the same trap as other globalist puppet presidents did so knowingly. Now, Trump didn't go in this knowingly to compromise, but because of his personality weaknesses, he's succumbed to flattery, and unfortunately, that means that North Korea is going to continue to grow as a threat. If and when the U.S., Trump or otherwise, ever starts to push North Korea militarily, it's going to be a much stronger North Korea that can truly threaten our bases in Guam and Hawaii, and even hit the mainland of the United States.
And for those who want to find out more of your thoughts about that, also we would refer them to our video, which we did with you in the past, called "Not with a Out with a Bang, Not a Whimper," talking about the potential risk of EMPs and so on.
Yes.
Could we turn our attention to a different theater here, the Middle East? Recently returned from Israel in a visit, myself and my family, because we've got some family members that are on a temporary work assignment there, and we were able to travel around and cross over the border into Palestine, and even got our cell phones. We're picking up Jordan. We got so close when we were at the Dead Sea. So, and talking with a lot of the local people there about the tensions that exist, your view of Israel's provoking of Iran, and what you think Israel might be after, or what kind of tensions in that region are likely to be at risk of escalating in the next months and years ahead?
Well, first I need to get some background on what the globalist objectives are in their intervention in the Middle East. As your listeners might know, my view is that the deep state planned and did 9/11, even to the hiring of the hijackers, placing the explosives in the World Trade Centers, and then blaming this on worldwide terrorism. The deep state basically controlled and grew Al-Qaeda, and they blamed that Osama bin Laden, who was working for the CIA for many, many years, as part of the Mujahideen, funded by Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden is Saudi Arabian. And interesting, after 9/11, who did George W. Bush fly out of the country? The entire family of Osama bin Laden. I mean, this is so laughable. It's almost tragic, that our own government was not only just deeply involved. This was a black operation from beginning to end. Now, with that said, they wanted to have an excuse to get into Afghanistan and Iraq, and they used 9/11 to do that. But as the Treasury Secretary and George W. Bush testified, the Bush administration was already planning on getting into Iraq. In a meeting that he attended, he said, we just need an excuse to attack. And that's what 9/11 gave them. It also gave them an excuse to get into Afghanistan, and they took away the entire poppy and heroin trade from the Soviets that were running that through Eastern Europe, and took it over for the CIA to combine with their drug trade that they do with Mexico. If your listeners haven't heard this, there's a lot of information on the web, including my website, about our government's use of drug trade to corrupt this nation and finance black operations. Now they do this with money creation now. The $21 trillion missing from the Pentagon is all for black budget weapons that are going on. But in the Middle East, the purpose of the globalists has been ultimately to attack Iran after the Iraq and Afghanistan justification of they wanted to attack Iran because Iran is the only Muslim country in the Middle East that is threatening to become self-sufficient in weaponry. The globalists cannot allow that. They've always used the Muslim and Arab countries as cannon fodder. World War I, they promised them the world through Lawrence of Arabia, and they betrayed all those promises. They created Iraq with these three ethnic groups, which was a recipe for conflict creation and disaster. But they had to get rid of Iran because Iran, although not, the Ayatollahs are not a nice group of people, but the Iranians themselves were pretty pro-Western until the U.S., betrayed them. And they in fact, a lot of Americans don't know that the CIA kept the Ayatollah Khomeini in Paris, a villa, paid his way, waiting for the Shah to fall. And so our own CIA was involved in the fall of the Shah and the creation of this Muslim radical community that led to the Iran-Contra affair. Now, the CIA also gave Iran faulty plans to nuclear weapons. A lot of Americans don't know that. They gave them the plans through a secret nuclear group out of the Pakistan, the Qanon group, working for the ISI. And they wanted to have an excuse to attack Iran, so they funneled nuclear weapons plans that were faulty, that didn't work, so that they could not be a threat by actually developing nuclear weapons, but they could be accused of trying to develop it so they could attack them. Well, the Iranians went to the French and got the plans corrected, so they could, in fact. And they did have a nuclear weapons program. And so the plan of the globalists was to have Israel, apparently being threatened by Iran. Israel would threaten Iran, and Iran would threaten back. And so the globalists could say, Israel, you can start this war with Iran by attacking its nuclear facilities. And Iran was going to do that. Tasked clear back in 2004 to start a war with Iran. By 2008, they still haven't started the war. And they told the globalists, and we found this out from an inadvertent attendee at a globalist meeting in the city of London where they were discussing these things. He was a big high financier in the city of London. And somebody invited him to this meeting with a bunch of globalists thinking that he was a globalist, but he wasn't. He was just a high financier in the city of London. He started hearing all this about attacking Iran and Israel and Russia and China and the globalist strategy for this. And boy, he got an earful. He wrote it down and he leaked it to a UK conspiracy site, and that's how we found out about it. But it revealed at that meeting that Israel had told the globalists, the reason we haven't attacked yet is we fear Syria. You've got to take down Syria before we'll attack Iran on your behalf. Now, you've got to remember that Benjamin Netanyahu was a Kissinger protege. He's masquerading as a right-wing, just like a right-wing leader, pro-settlement, just like Ariel Sharon, who betrayed the very settlers he claimed to. But these people are globalists. They're not right-wing. So in America, you have American Christians and conservatives who have a knee-jerk reaction, got to support Israel. It's God's mandate to return the people to the promised land. And while I'm a believer in those biblical promises, nevertheless, you've got to remember, you've got to separate the Israeli people, who are as ignorant as American people about U.S. conspiracy generally, with the fact that their leaders have been globalists. So Netanyahu is a Kissinger protege. And so he tells the globalists, we're not going to attack Iran until you take care of Syria. So 4 years ago, the U.S. they gave a red line and said, if Syria uses chemical weapons on anybody, and the U.S. globalists actually started the revolution against the Syrian government, and then those same rebels that the U.S. was supporting got chemical weapons through Saudi Arabia and did an attack on Damascus so that the U.S. could have an excuse to attack Syria. You remember that first chemical weapons attack on Damascus? I analyzed in the World Affairs Brief and I said, look, Assad is a Western-trained ophthalmologist, a very smart person. He's not like his father. He's not ruthless. Besides, anyone with any smarts would know you don't use chemical weapons on rebels or guerrillas in a city environment because you can't pinpoint anything with chemical weapons. You're going to get civilians. Nobody would try to use chemical weapons in a civilian environment. It's for out in the open against troops. So I said, this thing smells like a false flag attack, and it was. Later on, we had one of the rebels themselves admit that they got the old sarin gas from Saudi Arabia through the U.S. deep state, basically. And so there have been 3 other chemical weapons blamed on them. They've all been done by the U.S.-backed rebels. The Syrian government has never done that. And unfortunately, Donald Trump believed his own intelligence services who lied to them, saying that, we think that Assad is guilty of this. And I've detailed all of the evidence showing that it was not. This was done by the rebels. So in essence, but the reason that the U.S. failed, basically, was that John Kerry got before a press conference in the city of London a year after, or the year that this was about 4 years ago, when the U.S. was planning on attacking Syria through a so-called no-fly zone, but it was like the Libyan no-fly zone. We had missiles going in, we had all kinds of guerrillas, and we had special forces going in, attacking them and destroying the Libyan army. And this was not just a no-fly zone. This was an attack under the cover of the name of no-fly. And then we're going to do the same thing in Syria. So a reporter asked John Kerry, he says, it looks like you're going to attack Syria. Is there any way that Syria can avoid this attack? And John Kerry, just off the top of his head says, oh yeah, they could give up their chemical weapons and we wouldn't attack. In an hour, Syria said, we accept. And Russia, on behalf of Syria, said, yeah, we'll make sure and monitor, make sure it gets done. And all of a sudden, Kerry had inadvertently ruined the whole globalist agenda, an excuse to take down Syria, by a slip of the tongue. You can imagine the tongue lashing he got when he got off that stage. But in any case, Syria did comply with giving up all their chemical weapons. And so then the U.S. deep state created ISIS. They basically took about half of the Syrian rebels and said, you're now ISIS. Now, they didn't do this by telling them all in a big group, you're now ISIS. What they did is they took the Israeli Mossad-trained Arabs who were running these terrorists, these rebels, who were the leaders. Israel's the best in the world about taking their own Israeli Arabs, training them to infiltrate all of the other Arab countries as spies and as terrorist leaders. So Israel's very much involved in running terrorism on behalf of the deep state. That's why during the entire run of ISIS going through Iraq, the U.S. Air Forces off of the carriers, and I'm a carrier pilot, you just don't know, you just got a target assignment, you blow the target up. They didn't know that the U.S. deep state through Israel was warning the ISIS leaders that are attacking. So these were empty buildings that they had. ISIS was always warned. It's just like when the U.S. bombed one of the convoys of ISIS oil going through Turkey. The oil was being marketed by Turkey, a U.S. ally, marketing ISIS oil and selling it to Israel. So Israel was complicit in the buying of ISIS oil. When the Russians finally attacked one of those convoys and said, look, this is what you should be doing, U.S., if you really are fighting ISIS. Why are you letting all these convoys of oil go in unprotected, undisturbed? So the U.S. bombed one convoy after the Russians did and threw down leaflets warning the truck drivers to flee, and then they bombed the convoy. And that's the last time they ever bombed a convoy. I mean, it's just a sham. The U.S. has rescued ISIS every time they've had a battle. In Mosul, they left a whole sector open so that ISIS could flee to live another day. In Raqqa, the last battle of ISIS, the U.S. paid 50 Arab semi-trucks to go in and rescue ISIS as part of the peace deal to avoid destroying the city of Raqqa. And it turns out, as the Arab drivers told, they rescued not only the ISIS members and their families, but their heavy weapons as well. And the U.S. reintegrated them into the rebel forces of Syria. And so that's why when Trump decided, against the advice of his globalist advisors, to pull out of Syria, they said, well, ISIS isn't defeated, because, you see, they can pull ISIS out of the Syrian rebels at any time and reconstitute them, and that's exactly what they did. So what I'm trying to tell your audience is this entire U.S. reasoning for being in Syria is a sham. The whole agenda is to get at Iran. In Israel right now, ever since the Russians stopped that agenda, stopped the U.S. from overthrowing ISIS, stopped the rebels cold, stopped ISIS. And I'm not a fan of the Russians. They're intending to strike the West someday. But they're doing the right thing in Syria because they know the U.S. is faking it. They know the U.S. is behind terror and fomenting it. And they're exposing that. as anyone would do if you're trying to make the U.S. into the boogeyman of the world. They are the boogeyman of the world. At least the deep state is, not the good part of the U.S. There's a white side to the CIA, a white side to the FBI. But the deep state is so deeply infiltrated, and Donald Trump doesn't have a clue of who's deep state and not. He replaced James Comey with Christopher Wray, who's also deep state. So, and his two Supreme Court nominees, William Barr, the Attorney General nominee, used to be a deep state fix-it man for George H.W. Bush. He covered up for the Iran-Contra scale. He covered up for the Ruby Ridge shooting. He was the Attorney General during that. It just goes on and on. But going back to Israel, Israel has been trying to provoke this war since Syria, even though it hasn't been defeated, it's so weakened militarily, having to fight the rebels, that Iran and the globalists now feel they can get away with starting a war with Iran. In fact, they want to start a war now because it will make sure that Trump has to keep U.S. troops there. And the reason that the globalists want U.S. troops in there is because when Israel starts the war against Iran, they know that Iran will retaliate not only against Israel, but against U.S. troops in the area. That will then give the U.S. an excuse to join Israel in attacking Iran. So this is a premeditated, messed up scenario aimed at getting at Iran. And that's why it's very significant that John Bolton told the CIA and the Pentagon to prepare plans to attack Iran. He did that in September. And so they're preparing the plans as we speak. So there's going to be a war with Iran in the Middle East.
What do you see as the underlying objective of such a war?
Well, the underlying objective, first of all of the globalist intervention in the Middle East, is to create an image of the world, of the U.S. as the bully of the world. And, it started in Serbia. It's why the U.S., when they invaded Syria, and they were the ones who created and falsified the issue of the Kosovarians killing these people. And, when the Kosovarians drove out the Serbs that were in Kosovo, it was the Kosovar communists that the CIA went to in Albania that came in and drove out the Kosovarians to blame the Serbians for doing it. It wasn't the Serbians at all. It was our own CIA bringing in the Kosovarians from Albania who were communists to drive them out. Now, so when the U.S. finally attacks Serbia, what do? They hit civilian infrastructure. They aren't hitting military targets. They hit the radio, television, the electric power plants, the sewer plants. And people were scratching their heads and saying, what are we targeting civilian infrastructure for? And it was interesting, after the phony fall of the Soviet Union, when Americans were very popular in Russia, after the Serbian attacks, suddenly all the Russian and Slavic people turned against the U.S. It did its job. It poisoned the Slavic people against the U.S. after they attacked civilians purposely in Serbia. Israel, the year or two after that, did the same thing in attacking Lebanon under the excuse of getting at Hezbollah. They hit civilian infrastructure, power plants, water plants, bridges, roads. They weren't hitting military targets at all, and they were following the same game plan of making themselves, provoking Iran to come to champion the Arabs against Israel. In other words, Israel itself was trying to provoke Arab negative reaction so that Israel, as they are right now, can claim we're doing this defensively because all these Arab nations are against us. But the real reason, they are provoking. They keep saying, you better not attack us because we're just defending ourselves. What, with 200 rockets? And what has Syria thrown at Israel? Nothing. But this week, Russia came out and said, you're not going to get away with this, Israel. We are going to start to retaliate with our excess SA-5, that's the S-200 anti-missile system, that has an offensive capability, it has a warhead. They're going to start launching those into Israel. They said in retaliation, only tit for tat, we don't want to start a war with you, but Russia's saying we're going to make you pay a price because Israel attacked the Damascus airport. Bad form, civilians killed, and it's stopping Syria from bringing in airlines now to normalize the country. And Israel's saying this is defensive. This is just ludicrous. Now, as I say, Israeli people don't know that their own leaders are following a globalist game plan any more than Americans know that.
So can you help fill in the blanks in my understanding of the underlying objective then is a globalist deep state objective to use the military of might of the U.S. and of Israel to provoke conflict in the Middle East, where both Israel and the U.S. end up looking like, or especially the U.S. ends up looking like an aggressor, so that what?
So that Russia can be justified in attacking the West someday. In other words, they have to hand to Putin an excuse. And he's been using this, actually, quite a few years in Russia to build his popularity. The U.S. is the boogeyman. They're putting sanctions on us. They're hurting our economy. They're intervening around the world. So Putin's using this. U.S. is the bully of the world, and he often does it in his press conference. Remember when he brought out those hypersonic missiles and says, "You think you can bully us, U.S.? We got the weapons now, and you better be careful." So the globalists created this bullying syndrome, and sure enough, it's meant to help Russia. You see, the globalists want this third world war.
Okay, now we're getting down to the part I didn't quite see. Okay,
That's
go ahead.
right. The globalists want this third world war because it's the only way to if they allow Russia and China, and I think before in the program about PDD 60 that was signed in 1997, changing our entire nuclear doctrine, instead of one to launch on warning to prevent any missiles from hitting or to retaliate before those missiles hit our missiles. Because if you absorb a nuclear first strike, all your missiles are dead in the silos. Okay, but if you launch on warning, the one who launches second is the one who wins, because the first missiles come in, they're not maneuverable, they're ballistic missiles. They hit empty silos, and our missiles hit live targets. So PDD 60 took away launch on warning from our missile forces. It also took away the alternate launch codes, so that if it doesn't get from the White House to the missiles, they can't launch even under attack. Before that time, our missile forces could launch if actually under attack, even if they didn't get permission from the White House. So all that's been changed. President Trump doesn't even know that's the doctrine. Nobody's told him. I don't think even a lot of military officers know. That's a long time ago. But PDD 60 has never been repealed. It's very dangerous. I think it allows the globalists to make sure that we absorb a nuclear first strike. Our missile forces think they're going to get the codes. I don't think they're going to get the codes, and they won't get them until it's too late. Now, once our military forces are decapitated with the first strike, our leaders come out of their bunkers and say, "Oh, the Russians and Chinese deceived us. We didn't know this was going to happen." But our only alternative now, that our military forces have been decapitated mostly, is to join in a militarized global government to prosecute the war. That's how we lose our sovereignty. That's how we get into the global New World Order. I don't think there's any other way. The U.S. will not do this voluntarily. Look at the opposition to globalism in the EU and in Britain, and to the TPP in the United States. But like 9/11, everybody laid down and said, do whatever it takes to save us. This is the mother of all terrorist attacks, when you decapitate our military. And that's why I'm sad to say, even as a former military officer and fighter pilot, I tell people who have children in the military, get them out, because our government is not going to protect those boys and girls when this nuclear strike falls. Now, our government is not suicidal. These globalists intend to still win this war. And you might ask, how do they intend to win after absorbing a nuclear first strike? Well, I think a lot of that $21 trillion has been going to secret weapon systems, including space-based missile interceptors. I think they can stop any further attacks from occurring while they regroup under the New World Order, under the militarized global government. And I think this new secret EU army, which is now suddenly coming out to replace NATO, is going to be the basis of that global New World Army. And that's why Theresa May has sabotaged the Brexit process and secretly given billions of pounds, British pounds, to a secret slush fund in Europe to finance this European order. This is the big picture, people. You probably won't ever hear this anywhere else, but this is the big picture of what you need to prepare for. It's not pretty, and we are being betrayed, and unfortunately, Trump isn't going to stop it.
Speaking of Trump, if we could turn our attention to the domestic border of our country, especially the southern border with Mexico. We were in day 34 or so of a government shutdown. Trump's still debating or negotiating with leaders in the Congress about being able to get funding for a wall. Can you talk to us about what you think are the dynamics that are playing out there and how much of a difference that actually makes in the next year to our fates as American citizens?
It is crucial, I believe, Dunnigan, because we've reached the point now where we're barely able to win an election as conservatives, and that's only through a candidate like Trump appealing to populism, which pulls in some independents and some Democrats even. I don't think a pure conservative, can win anymore. But it's absolutely guaranteed if we continue to allow more illegal immigrants who end up voting Democratic. And that's exactly what the agenda is all about, is open borders. That's why the Democrats don't want a wall. A wall is effective. The Border Patrol knows it. They've said it openly. We can tell because it funnels people around the wall. That means the wall is doing a job, and we can more easily catch them as they funnel around the wall. Even when they climb over the wall, it takes them time, and we can catch them more easily when our cameras pick it up. But without a wall, by the time our cameras pick it up and we get there, they're long gone. And so the wall is effective, and that's why the Democrats don't want it. Now, to be frank, we applaud President Trump for saying this is a campaign promise I am going to keep. And believe me, he's got to, because his support base is a lot based upon this stopping illegal immigration. And unfortunately, the cracks are showing in this right now. Even though he's been playing hardball, the Democrats know that they've got the media on their side. They continue to showcase federal workers going to the food bank and other things and the hardship. They don't talk about all the federal workers that make six figures and other things. But there are a lot of poor federal workers, and they're only showcased in the media. And, of course, they blame Donald Trump for it. I don't think that Trump is going to get a wall unless he does a state of emergency. And even though there's no provision in the Constitution for a state of emergency, it has been passed by Congress. I think it should have been challenged because there is no authority for Congress to give emergency powers. But they're there. And even the courts realize Trump can use it, and there is an emergency. And what people don't realize what he could do, I don't even think Trump knows what he could do in an emergency. He can do more than just build his wall. He can stop foreign aid funding to fund it. I mean, there's plenty of money coming. He can stop contributions to the UN, something that conservatives long wanted. You could never get that through Congress. You can never stop foreign aid in Congress, but you can do it under an emergency. You can stop abortion payments.
I was going to ask about that one. It's like one that's been promised for a long time. Yep.
You can stop funding for Planned Parenthood. You could do anything under state of emergency. Now, how do you stop a state? Congress could take away the emergency powers. But in a bill, it would have to be passed by both houses, and it would have to be signed by Donald Trump. So, you see, the president has all the cards in these emergency powers. And the deep state knows that. That's why they gave such wide-ranging emergency powers, so they can use them for tyrannical purposes. Now, I've heard, like Pastor Chuck Baldwin has complained to me. He's a good friend of mine, but he says, Joel, you can't be for a state of emergency because it's unconstitutional. I said, look, Chuck, the Constitution is dead. They only obey it to make you think that they're obeying, but they disregard it at will whenever they want, and so do the courts. So I said, let's use it because we only have a window of about 2 years to stop this illegal immigration. It's not going to happen without a state of emergency. And if you can stop it, even using, by the way, it's not going to increase or give the left an excuse to use it. They already have the power. They're going to use it for tyrannical. So let's use it to at least safeguard, give us a few more years to keep our majorities by not allowing more illegals to come in. That's my argument to Chuck and other conservatives who, want us to abide by the Constitution, but the liberals obviously don't. So this is a crucial time. I think if we don't stop this, and I'm worried that Trump is already compromising. He said today that if Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell can work out a compromise and give me a substantial down payment on the wall, then I'll probably sign it. You see, he's got tremendous power to get it. So he just needs some kind of victory. But let me tell you, $5 billion isn't going to build more than 200 miles of fencing, not concrete walls, at the present prices that they're charging. If you get a substantial down payment of maybe $2 billion, and Nancy Pelosi came out and said, no way, we're not giving any down payment on the wall. But it just shows Trump's mentality now is leaning towards getting the pressure off for and starting the government back. If he can have anything, he's just saying, give me something on the wall, but it's not enough. And in return, when you're offering amnesty to dreamers, and he's now talking about permanent amnesty, not just temporary, this is worse than the wall, because the wall at 200 extra miles isn't going to stop illegal immigrant, and you're going to get amnesty. So the left is getting what they want. Trump's getting essentially nothing, but we'll call it a success. So I'm really worried, Dunnigan.
Can we talk a little bit? You just touched on that process of the vulnerability that we have as a nation to the dependence that we have grown to have on the federal government, with as many people in our country as are dependent. I think there was a calculation that over half of the people in the country receive government assistance in one form or another, and that is this. There are many ways that we can be weakened and be vulnerable, but this is an interesting one, that the more dependency we have as a populace, we become less free people, because you get into a situation like this where if the pain is so widespread on so many people from the shutdown of our government, seems like this is something that we've allowed, it's evidence that we've allowed ourselves to become vulnerable and dependent on that. Your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I call it the benefit corruption syndrome. We get corrupted by benefits, and you have millions of people on food stamps. At least 3/4 of them shouldn't be on food stamps. Migrants are given automatic food stamps cards. Illegal aliens can get them, can qualify, because the courts keep saying, due process, you can't deny anybody who's in the United States these benefits. The California courts have ruled for years that you can't deny them public schooling or hospital care, free hospital care. So when, I'm concerned that in the next big stock market crash, when it really goes down and the plunge protection team can't bring it back up, or doesn't bring it back up, we're going to have a hue and cry from all of the millions dependent on pension funds for a government bailout. And then you're going to have so many people that have been on the free market side suddenly dependent on government. And if you have a government shutdown, our pensions aren't being paid, so we have to compromise and get the government going. That's where we're headed. More and more people working for the federal, dependent on the federal government, whether it's Medicare at the state level, and in many states, they're talking about we're having to bring out funds because the federal payments for Medicare aren't coming, and so we're having to make up. We're having to pay for the national parks. So everybody, even in conservative Utah and Idaho, are calling for the politicians to open the government and Trump to compromise. So that's where we're headed, Dunnigan, and it's not a pretty picture. But as I say, 2 years from now, if we don't get that wall closed, and if we don't stop that illegal immigration, it's all over. We will be in a total vice grip from raw democracy, where the majorities, I'll tell you, if the Democrats win the presidency and both houses of Congress, it's all over. We're going to see laws change so fast and taxes raised so quickly, it's going to erase all the little good that Trump has done.
We've heard over the last several years from different outlets and some guests on our channel that a commentator, supposedly highly connected by the name of Qanon, is saying, don't worry, the cavalry's coming, and we've already got people in place, and there's plans afoot, and Trump's going to be backed in ways by loyalists that will make all turn out well in the end, and those who deserve to get theirs will get theirs. What's your take on the reality versus just a distraction of Q as a source of true hope or not?
It's pure disinformation. It is the deep state itself trying to build up false hopes for Trump, and then they're going to dash it so that everybody loses faith that Trump didn't do it. I mean, it's, he had deadlines in November where 30,000 deep state people were going to be indicted. The indictment papers were already ready, and it never happened. And of course, Q can reinvent excuses of why it didn't happen and keep people up. The latest thing is that there are published photos of prison ships heading for Guantanamo. They're supposedly full of the deep state people that have been arrested. It's just pure bogus. It's absolutely bogus. The prison ship is not headed for Guantanamo. It isn't going there. Even if it did, it's empty. It's not full of deep state people. So we have to be worried about false hope. One of the things that, in terms of preparedness, that I have emphasized over the years is that the thing we must do as conservatives and Christians, or good Muslims who are conservatives too, what I'm saying, we must prepare for a takedown. We mustn't let the hope of optimism deter us from preparing and from realizing the depth of despair that a nuclear war will be and an EMP strike if we haven't prepared. If you don't have the fuel, if you don't have the generators, if you don't have the solar and things, you're going to be freezing, you're going to be cold, you're going to be out of food and water. So what I'm just saying is that even for those of you who still have optimism, and I'm afraid I don't have much anymore, other than the fact that the Lord will always allow a remnant to survive. He will never completely, I don't think we'll win our freedom back once this war starts as a nation, but I think there'll be pockets of liberty. And that's why strategic relocation is the more important, to know where the conservative pockets are. When you flee, you don't go into democratic strongholds like California, but you go to other places that are conservative-based and religious-based. But we need to realize that as we try to preserve our liberty, as we try to wake other people up, still prepare for the worst. Prepare for the worst, because the worst is coming.
We are getting short on time, and before we let you go, I wanted you to be able to give people an idea where they can find out more, because you just mentioned, for example, strategic relocation, and you've written about that. You've got blog entries about that. So where can they find out more of your work, Joel?
I have 3 major works on preparedness. It's the Strategic Relocation North American Guide to Safe Places, covers everything in the U.S. and Canada, and internationally I cover why you don't want to retreat internationally. And I've lived internationally, so I know. I've lived in many different countries, and I speak multiple foreign languages. I've written, my big opus magnum is The Secure Home, over 700 pages of everything you need to know about security, strategy, generators, solar, pages and pages of lists of hard-to-find things. That's The Secure Home. And the last book is the High Security Shelter book, very important for people who have, it's meant for people, it's the cheapest way to get a shelter within the home, in a safe room that's concealed, putting one in the basement of your home. You can even do it in a garage if you don't have a basement, but it's got architectural plans, the concealment, the checklist, everything you need to know. And for my updated version of everything that happens each week in the world, I have the World Affairs Brief. That's at my website, worldaffairsbrief.com, and people can get a free sample issue of tomorrow's brief coming out just by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. My books are available on my website, joelskousen.com, or they're all available on Amazon as well.
We've been speaking with Joel Skousen, author, editor, publisher, and here with us again to talk to us about world affairs and why they are important to you this year and in the years to come. Joel, thank you, as always, for joining us here at Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure.
They say the stock market crashed today.
Yeah, I heard that.
Sounds like people's retirement accounts and savings accounts are going to get bailed into the banks.
Yeah.
Looks like pension plans and Social Security are going to get suspended too.
I know.
Sure, I'm glad we decided to put our money into gold and silver instead.
Me too.
Get your first ounce of silver at spot price and free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/RP. Hey, Reluctant Preppers. If you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser. And you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.